Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah Shir. We are holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and we will be learning today in Mirza Hashem Daf Zayin Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos, and we are working our way through the sugya of Amira La'akum. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanesunim Batzara Ubashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha Hamokim Yirachem Aleihem Ve'yitziim Mitzara L'Rvacha Me'afelo La'oiro Mishibud L'Geula Hashta V'Agala Uvizman Kariv V'Neimar Amen. So we're here in Siman Reish Mem Hey. We pick up today on the very top line of Zayin Amud Beis in the middle of Reish Mem Hey Sif Aleph. Now here in Reish Mem Hey, we've been discussing the halacha of a Yehudi, a Yisrael, who has a shutvis. He has a partnership, a joint venture, together with an Eina Yehudi. Right away, when we have a Yehudi and an Eina Yehudi in a joint business venture, we're going to have the issue of how do we deal with Shabbos, assuming that the business is going to be operating on Shabbos. What do we do about Shabbos? Now, in the Hakdama to Siman Reish Mem Hey, I mentioned to the Olam the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. So let's review very quickly. That Gemara in Avodah Zarah gave us 4 different potential scenarios of how a deal might be constructed between the Yehudi and the Eina Yehudi dealing with the question of Shabbos. Who's going to work on Shabbos? Who's going to keep the revenue from Shabbos? We had here 4 scenarios. From those 4 scenarios, we have 2 that the Gemara says are osir. We have 1 that the Gemara leaves as iniboya delay ifshita, a question that remained unresolved by the Gemara. And we had 1 scenario that the Gemara says is mutter. Let's run through them very quickly. So what are the 2 scenarios that are osir? Well, we have to understand, as soon as the Yehudi and the Eina Yehudi go together and they join in this partnership, immediately upon entering that partnership. So let's say the partnership is over a bakery oven. So they buy a bakery oven, they buy it b'shutvis, and somebody has to operate the oven, somebody has to fire it up, somebody has to do the baking. So all of this is going to entail meleches iser on Shabbos. As soon as they buy that oven together b'shutvis, with the intent of making this business, it is instantly incumbent upon both of them to do 50% of the work. That's what a partnership is. Each one is going to do 50% of the work. Each one is going to keep 50% of the revenue. Now, it's possible that they can make the deal 60-40, 70-30, 80-20, whatever it is. I'm just picking on 50-50 for ease of explanation. Therefore, what the Gemara says is like this. Let's say they go ahead and they buy the oven. So they have now entered into the business venture together, and now 50% of the work is incumbent upon each one of them. Now the Yehudi turns to the Eina Yehudi, and he says, I just realized I have a problem. How am I going to deal with Shabbos? I can't work on Shabbos. I can't keep the revenue on Shabbos because of Schar Shabbos. How am I going to deal with this? You know how I'm going to deal with it? We'll make a deal. Tony, you do all of the Shabbos work. You keep all of the Shabbos revenue. I'll do all of the Tuesday work. I'll keep all of the Tuesday revenue. And the Yisrael is thinking that by doing this, he has solved his problems. How? He's divesting himself of Shabbos. He's divorcing himself from Shabbos. Shabbos is Tony's. He does the work, he keeps the revenue. Yeah, but why would Tony do that? Oh, because I'm going to take on 100% of the work on Tuesday. So he's going to do 100% of the work on Shabbos. I'm going to do 100% of the work on Tuesday. He keeps 100% of the Shabbos revenue. I keep 100% of the Tuesday revenue. So the Yehudi thinks that he has solved his problem. Says the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that would be osir. Why is it osir? Because what happened over here? They entered into the partnership. As soon as they entered into the partnership, the Yehudi became responsible for 50% of Shabbos' work. When he now turns to Tony to make the deal, and he tells Tony, look, I got to make a deal with you. You do 100% of the Shabbos work and keep 100% of the Shabbos revenue. What he's really doing is, he's really hiring Tony. He's making Tony a shliach to cover his Shabbos obligations. And he's paying him by covering all of Tony's obligations on Tuesday. So says the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that would be Aser. Then the Gemara in Avodah Zarah takes it to another step. Let's say they enter into the venture, so they already bought the oven, and they don't make the deal now. You know what they do? Not a word is spoken about Shabbos. Nobody speaks about Shabbos. For whatever reason, maybe Tony realizes on his own that Ruvain, his partner, is a Sabbath-observing Jew. So Tony goes ahead, Tony does all the work on Shabbos, and Ruvain by himself happens to go ahead and do extra work on Tuesday. Nobody says anything. Shabbos is never spoken about. Now, at the end of the fiscal year, they sit down together with their accountant, and now it's time for them to make the chalukah. Now it's time for them to actually divvy up the proceeds of the business. So when they sit down to divvy up the proceeds of the business, Ruvain turns to Tony and he says, look, I have a Shabbos problem. Now, you've been very nice. You've been covering all the Shabbos work. And I've been realizing it, so I've been covering all the Tuesday work. Now it's time for us to divvy up the money. You keep all of the Shabbos money. I'm going to keep all of the Tuesday money. Says the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that's also Aser. Why is that Aser? Because it's very nice that this arrangement was never spoken about up front. After we bought the oven, when we started doing the work, we never spoke about it. So Ruvain never made Tony, he never appointed Tony to be his shliach to go work on Shabbos. In the first scenario, after they bought the bakery oven, Ruvain turned to Tony and said, look, you do all the Shabbos work. So he actually appointed him to be a shliach. In this second scenario, Ruvain never actually appointed Tony to be the shliach. It's only now at the end of the fiscal year when we sit with the bookkeepers and the accountants, it's coming up now. It's coming up post facto. But post facto, what Ruvain is saying is, look, you did the work on Shabbos, you keep the Shabbos revenue. I did all the work on Tuesday. I'll keep all the Tuesday revenue. Igloi milsalam afreya. Now it becomes very clear that the reason Tony was in the shop, in the bakery, every week on Shabbos doing the work alone is because he was acting as a shliach for Ruvain. So now we also have a problem. This is also Aser. Says the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that's the second scenario, which is Aser. In the words of the Gemara, that is the imbo lecheshbon. If this only comes up when they sit down to make the cheshbon, it's still Aser. And in the words of Rashi, the reason it is Aser is because the Schar Shabbos hu noitel. First of all, it's Aser al Schar Shabbos. He's going ahead, Ruvain, he's taking revenue from Shabbos. The Gali Daitoi David Kechav Shluchah. Because what they're saying post facto is that Tony was always acting as his shliach. Okay. Then we had one scenario, which is mutter. What's the scenario that's mutter? The scenario that's mutter is Ruvain and Tony go to the office to sign the papers to buy the bakery oven. Before they buy the bakery oven, before they actually enter into the joint venture, Ruvain turns to Tony and lets Tony know that he has a Shabbos problem. And they make up, before they ever go into business together, they make up that Tony is going to do all the Shabbos work, Tony's going to keep all the Shabbos revenue, and Ruvain's going to do all the Tuesday work and keep all the Tuesday revenue. That, the Gemara says, is mutter. Why is that mutter? Very simple. Ruvain never had anything to do with the Shabbos business. Ruvain never bought the Shabbos business. It was never incumbent upon Ruvain to do any work on Shabbos. As soon as they went into the deal was structured that Shabbos is Tony's. So there's B'chlal, there's no Amir Lakim, there's no Schar Shabbos, there's no anything. Ruvain is totally divested from the Shabbos business. So that's mutter. Then we had the fourth case, which by the Gemara was an Iboy de la Yivshita. The Gemara didn't resolve it. What was that case? That case was they bought the oven together. They started doing work together. Nobody ever spoke about Shabbos. Tony on his own did the Shabbos work. Ruvain on his own did the Tuesday work. They went ahead and they came at the end of the day to make a cheshbon. And when it became time to make the cheshbon, I'm just checking the words of the Gemara over here. The words of the Gemara here are hastama. If it happened stam, It happens to be that Tony went ahead and did all the Shabbos work. Ruvain went ahead and he did all of the Tuesday work, and they never spoke about it. They never spoke about it up front before they bought the oven. They never spoke about it after they bought the oven. They didn't even speak about it when they went to sit down with the accountant to make a cheshbon. When they sat down by the accountant looked at them and said, oh, Ruvain and Tony, the two of you have a 50-50 venture, right? Yeah, okay, you take 50% of the money, you take 50% of the money. Nobody ever speaks about Shabbos. Is Ruvain allowed to take 50% of the money? If he's taking 50% of the money, isn't he taking 50% of Shabbos' money? If he's taking 50% of Shabbos' money, doesn't that mean that Tony was his shliach? This the Gemara leaves unresolved. Why is it unresolved? Because over here, nobody ever spoke about Shabbos. No arrangements were ever made about Shabbos. You're getting 50% of the revenue. It turns out that you got 50% of the money and it was made on Shabbos. Well, is there really Amir La'akum? When Tony went in and he did the work on Shabbos, he's making money. There's a strong reason to say Nachri Adaita den Avshei Ka'avid. An Aris is allowed to, if it's an Arisus situation, we said that two sharecroppers that work together, we don't say that when the Goyish sharecropper is working on Shabbos, we don't say that he's working as a shliach of the Yehudi, we say Nachri Adaita den Avshei Ka'avid. So over here also, Nachri Adaita den Avshei Ka'avid. I'm making money, that's why I'm working on Shabbos. Shabbos was never spoken about. Schar Shabbos? It's hard to say that there would be a Schar Shabbos problem because there's Havlah. What do you mean? I'm taking 50% of the revenue for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos. So it could be Havlah. So this was left by the Gemara as an Ibaya Deloy Ifshuta. Now, over here in Siman Reish Bem Hey, in the beginning of Sif Aleph, the Mechaber covered the scenario that's mutter. The Mechaber told us at the beginning of Sif Aleph, you want to know how to do this in a way that's mutter? Before you enter into the business venture, make the Tanai. Before you buy the bakery oven, make the Tanai. Tony, you're going to do all the Shabbos work. You're going to keep all the Shabbos revenue. Me, Ruvain, I'm going to do all the Tuesday work. I'm going to keep all the Tuesday revenue. That's perfect. That's the scenario that the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says is mutter. Now, on the top line of the Shulchan Aruch, Zayin Amud Beis, we're going to see the scenario that's Aser. And when we look in the Mishnah Berurah, we'll see that the Mechaber over here is covering not only one scenario that's Aser, he's covering both scenarios that the Gemara in Avodah says is Aser, and he's also paskening what he holds about the Abaya Deloy Ifshita, about what happens if they make the Chalukah Stam and Shabbos is never spoken about. Let's see the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, top line, Zayin Amud Beis. V'em lo yihisnu b'tchila. Let's say they don't do the right thing. They don't make the Tanai up front. Now, the Mechaber doesn't say what they did do. The Mechaber just says that they didn't make the Tanai up front. Okay. Did they make the Tanai after they bought the bakery oven? The Mechaber doesn't say. Did they speak about Shabbos when they made the Chalukah? The Mechaber doesn't say. The Mechaber just says, what case am I addressing? They failed to do the right thing. They did not make the Tanai up front. What's the halacha? If they didn't make the proper Tanai up front, then when they sit down with the accountant to divvy up the revenue, Tony, the Eina Yehudi, should take all of the revenue that was produced on Shabbos, and the rest of the revenue that was made the rest of the week, they could divide up. So what's the Mechaber paskening here? And the Mechaber is telling you should know. If you didn't follow the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, if you did not make the Tanai that I told you about in the beginning of Sif Aleph, then the Yid cannot take any of the Shabbos revenue. Finished. By not taking any of the revenue of Shabbos, then it turns out that Tony was not his shliach to work for him. What do you mean he was my shliach to work for me? I didn't make money on Shabbos. So there's no Amir Lakum, there's no Schar Shabbos. I'm not making any money on Shabbos. I'm not taking any of the Shabbos money. Says the Mechaber. And what if your accountant never understood that he had to isolate the Shabbos revenue? What if he doesn't know precisely what revenue was made on Shabbos? What do you do then? Says the Mechaber, I'll tell you what to do. You should divide up the revenue into 7. into 7 portions, and we will assign 1/7 of the revenue to Shabbos, and v'chol k'mashar, and split the rest. So here we have the Mechaber. The Mechaber told us at the beginning of Sif Aleph, you have this joint venture with the Eina Yehudi. You got to make the Tanai up front before you even enter into the joint venture. Now, says the Mechaber, you failed to make that Tanai, then all bets are off. If you failed to make that Tanai, you can't keep any of the Shabbos revenue. Points out the Mishnah Berurah right away in Oiskot and Zayin. V'mloi histu b'tchila. Realize that the Mechaber wrote this kasav stama. The Mechaber wrote this in a very general way. The Mechaber wrote, you didn't make the Tanai, you can't keep any Shabbos revenue. Now, how many of the scenarios from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah does that cover? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Kasav stama lesser below yisnu. He writes in a very general way, as long as you didn't make the Tanai, keeping the revenue of Shabbos is also. That means, afilu im loy omar loy, avoid ata b'Shabbos va'ani b'chol. This means it's usher, even if you did not make the bad Tanai. What's the bad Tanai? The bad Tanai is what the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says. If you made the Tanai after you bought the oven, then that means that Ruvain made Tony a shliach. But the Mechaber doesn't say over here, if you didn't make the Tanai before you bought the oven, but you made the Tanai after you bought the oven, then it's usher. No, he just says if you didn't make the Tanai. So that means, even if you didn't make the Tanai up front, as long as you didn't make the Tanai up front, even if you did not make the Tanai after you bought the oven, so you never actually appointed him to be a shliach, it's usher. V'gam b'shas chaluka loy hiska loy shel Shabbos. Nor did you speak about Shabbos when you sat down with the accountant. So you didn't make the Tanai up front. You didn't ask Tony to do all the Shabbos work after you bought the oven. You didn't sit down with the accountant at the end of the fiscal year and say, oh, I have a Shabbos problem. You, Tony, keep all the Shabbos revenue. I'll keep all the Tuesday revenue. No, you didn't do those things. All you did was you failed to make the Tanai up front. What you want to do is, now at the end of the fiscal year, you want to keep Shabbos under the table. You don't want to say a word about Shabbos. And you just want to divide everything up 50-50. What's that? That case is the Abaya Deloy Ifshita in Avodah Zarah. That case would be, you bought the bakery oven as a joint venture. You never spoke about Shabbos. At the end of the fiscal year, you made the appointment with the accountant. The accountant said, oh, Ruvain, Tony, you have a 50-50 venture. Okay, we'll divide the revenue in half. You take half, you take half. And what's the Mechaber saying? It's usher. So here's where you see that the Mechaber paskins l'chumra. He paskins like the Rambam l'chumra by the Gemara's case in Avodah Zarah that it left as an ibaya deloy ifshita. So here we see that the Mechaber is being very machmir. The 2 cases of the Gemara Avodah Zarah that the Gemara says are usher, fine. That's usher. You made the Tanai after you bought the oven. You made the Tanai at the time of divvying up the revenue. Fine. That the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says is usher, and the Mechaber says that that's usher. But also, reading in between the lines on the Mechaber, where the Mechaber just says it's usher as long as you didn't make the Tanai up front, that includes the Gemara's 4th scenario, the Abaya Deloy Ifshita. You didn't make the Tanai up front, and you never spoke about Shabbos. Not after you bought the oven, not when you made the chalukah. You're never talking about Shabbos. You just want to split 50-50. The Mechaber paskins, it's usher. Afilu achi usher. Kevin shaloi hisnu kaidem shenishtatfu. Okay, so that's the Shitas HaMechaber. Now let's go to the Ramah, and we'll see that the Ramah disagrees with that last case. Let's take a look what the Mechaber says. Hago, the Ramah. Says the Ramah, 3rd line down here in Zayin and Beis in the Shulchan Aruch. Hago. V'yesh matirin haschar b'di'evet. There are those that are matir, the Yisrael, to keep the revenue b'di'evet, afilu loy hisnu, even if they did not make the Tanai up front, v'chilku stam. And at the end of the day, they sat down with the accountant without talking about Shabbos, and they want to just divvy up the profits 50-50 or 70-30 or 60-40, whatever they had made up, whatever the venture was. This is the Shitas Harash and the Shita of Rabbeinu Yerucham. So this is going on the Gemara in Avodah Zarah's 4th case, The Aboya de la Yifshita, they bought the oven. Before they bought the oven, they didn't make it tonight. After they bought the oven, they still didn't make it tonight. When they sat down with the accountant, they still didn't bring up Shabbos. Shabbos was never mentioned. And now they just want to divvy up the profits. The Mechaber Paskin, sorry, you didn't make it tonight up front. The Yid is not allowed to take any of the Schar Shabbos. Either they have to isolate the Schar Shabbos and let the Ein Yehudi keep it all. If they can't isolate it, divide it up in sevens, and he gets an extra seventh of the profit, because you can't take the Schar Shabbos. The Ramah brings down the Shitas Harash that in that case, where Shabbos was never spoken about, the Yid could go ahead and the Yid could take the money. And says the Ramah, V'nirali, it appears to me, the Behefsid Gadol, that if we're talking about a lot of money over here, Yesh Lismay Chalayu, you could rely on the rush. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Ches. V'chilku stam, Hainu, the Mishnah Berurah wants to be very careful to define the case. Hainu, Shebeshas Chaluka lo Hisker lo Yisrael es HaShabbos. When they sit down with the accountant to divide up the money, the Yid doesn't say a word about Shabbos. Loimar, to tell the Ein Yehudi, Ata titel keneged yom hamolcha b'Shabbos. Listen, you are kind enough to work on Shabbos. You take the money keneged Shabbos. Vani etel keneged yom hamoli b'choil, and I'll take my share of the revenue against the Tuesdays that I work the whole day on Tuesday. No, this was never spoken about. Ella chol kustam b'Shaveh. They had their appointment with the accountant. They sat down by the accountant. The accountant said, okay, you have a 50-50 venture. Let's divide it up 50-50. V'gam Mairi, shaloi amaloi betchila, it also, the Ramah is also addressing where they didn't make the forbidden Tanai. The word betchila over here is a little bit funny. Betchila you would think means in the beginning. In the beginning usually means before they ever made the oven, before they ever bought the oven. That's not what it means here. V'gam Mairi, shaloi amaloi betchila. They didn't say, when they first started working after they bought the oven, avoid ata b'Shabbos, you work on Shabbos, and I'll work on Tuesday. No, that didn't happen. Because on that, the Ramah wouldn't say you could be makel. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah says that's 100% aser. You're making Tony or Shliach to work for you on Shabbos. Ella, so what did happen? What happened over here was, you entered into the business venture, and Tony on his own realized you're a Sabbath-observing Jew. You can't work on Shabbos. So he worked on Shabbos. And the Yid, corresponding to that, also did all the work on Tuesday. But it was never spoken about. Because if that's not the Ramah's case, if the Ramah's case is that Shabbos was spoken about after they bought the oven, or if the Ramah's case was that they spoke about Shabbos when they're divvying up the money, the Ramah wouldn't be matter that. The Ramah would agree that that's aser. It's a beferish Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Why is it aser? The gali daite the shlucha hayal Shabbos v'hu amal keneged b'choil, because that would be that the Yid made the Ein Yehudi a shliach to work at Shabbos, which would be 100% aser. Since the work was always incumbent upon both of them, so that means that Tony covered Ruvain's work, Ruvain covered Tony's work. That would be mamash aser. So the Ramah could not be matir that. What the Ramah is being matir, what he's saying that you could rely on the rush in the case of Hefsid Merubah, where he's disagreeing with the Mechaber. The Mechaber is machmer like the Rambam. The Ramah is being maker like the rush, is only in the Gemara and Avoda's case that's an Aboya de la Ifshita, where it's stam. Shabbos was never spoken about. Not up front, not after they bought the oven, not at the time of the Chalukah. That's where the Ramah is saying that we could possibly like the rush, we could be making like the rush in the case of Hefsid Merubah. Okay, now we go off on, not a tangent, but now we're going to address a slightly different case. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'da, you should realize, the Kol HaSif Hazeh, this entire Sif Aleph, where we're talking about that you need to make this Tanai up front, Myri is talking about a case, Shaha Yisrael v'ha'ena Yehudi, Hem Shutfim Beguf Hatana v'Amerchatz. Where, what does it mean that they're partners? It means that they're partners in the actual physical item of the partnership. If it's a bakery oven, they each have 50% ownership of the oven. If it's a hardware store, they each have 50% ownership of the hardware store. If it's a bathhouse, if it's a field, we're talking about a case where the partnership is a partnership where they each have 50% ownership of the actual business. Aval, however, Im ein lein Yehudi chelik beguf hataner. Let's say we're talking about the bakery oven, but the partnership is not that each one of them owns 50% of the oven. There's a different kind of partnership. Rak shehu makabel chelik berevach. The partnership is that the Yehudi owns 100% of the oven. And we can see this happening. A Yid has some money. He wants to go into business. He wants to make money. He's ready to buy an oven, but he's not a baker. He doesn't know how to bake. He's not interested in baking. So he's going to buy 100% of the oven, and he's going to hire Tony the baker as an employee to work the oven. But how is he going to pay Tony? He's not going to pay Tony with a paycheck. He's not going to make him a salaried worker. He's going to give Tony a percentage of the revenue. So that's the partnership. The partnership is, let's go into business together. I'll own the oven, you do the work. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's a whole different halacha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Aval, im ein lein Yehudi chelik beguf hataner. If the Ein Yehudi has no ownership of the actual oven, rak shehu makabel chelik berevach, he's only getting a portion of the revenue, bishvil shehu oife umasek hataner, in return for doing the baking and firing up the oven. In that case, yesh oimrim deloi mahani bazeh, there are those that say that the Tanai that we're speaking over here in Sif Aleph would not work. It wouldn't take away the Shabbos problem. It still would be usher for the Yehudi to take revenue on Shabbos. Why? We have to follow this. Even if they would make a Tanai up front, and Ruvain would say to Tony the baker, Toil ato chelkecha b'Shabbos. You do all the work on Shabbos. You usually do all the work, right? You do all the work on Shabbos. You go into the bakery. You fire up the oven. You do the baking. V'ani yom echad b'chol. And what we'll do is, normally the way this works is, you do the baking, but normally you only keep 50% of the revenue, right? I own the oven. For my ownership of the oven, I get 50% of the revenue. You do the baking. For your work, you get 50% of the revenue. So we're making a Tanai up front. What's the Tanai? The Tanai is, Tony, I got a Shabbos problem. So you know what we're going to do? Shabbos is going to be different than the rest of the week. Shabbos, you do the baking, like you always do, but you're going to keep 100% of the revenue. 50% of the revenue is your normal paycheck. Shabbos, you're going to keep 100% of the revenue. Now, Ruvain is losing 50% revenue on Shabbos. So on Tuesday, Ruvain says, you're going to do the baking, but you're not going to get your usual 50% of the revenue. Tuesday, I'm going to keep 100% of the revenue. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there are those that say that doesn't work. That doesn't take away the Shabbos problem. Why? Explains the Mishnah Berurah. Why doesn't it work? Because in this case, Kevan sheguf hataner hu shel Yisrael, since the baking oven actually belongs to the Yid, so what's happening here? Says the Chofetz Chaim. Havalei, when you analyze this story, you know what's really happening? Havalei kemaskir loy tanuroi al Shabbos. What Ruvain, who owns 100% of the oven, is really doing, he's renting out his oven to Tony for Shabbos. He's telling Tony, the oven is yours for Shabbos. You're going to use the oven on Shabbos, and you're going to keep all the bread that you sell, all the cake that you sell, you're going to keep all the revenue. Now, whose oven is it? It's Ruvain's oven. How is Tony using it and keeping all the revenue? Oh, because Ruvain is renting out the oven to Tony, for Tony to make business and make money on Shabbos. What's Ruvain getting in return? What's the rental payment? In what way is Tony paying Ruvain the rental? Oh, you know how? Because on Tuesday, usually, really on Tuesday, 50% of the revenue is supposed to belong to Tony. Tony's the baker, he gets 50% of the revenue. But on Tuesdays, Ruvain's keeping all of the revenue, even though Tony's still doing the baking. So what does that mean? That means Tony is paying Ruvain 50% of Tuesday's revenue. You know why? Because that's his rental payment. So says the Mishnah Berurah, really when you look at it, what's happening here? What's happening is Ruvain the Yid owns a bakery oven. He can't work on Shabbos. So he's renting it out to an Ein Yehudi. He's renting it out to Tony the baker so that Tony the baker could run a bakery business on Shabbos. How is Ruvain getting paid? He's getting paid by making an extra 50% of the revenue on Tuesday. Now, is that mutter on Shabbos? No. That's a Yid who owns a business. He's renting out the business for Shabbos to an Eina Yehudi. And what's happening now? You're making schar Shabbos. It's not an Amir La'akum problem. It's not a problem that Tony is acting as a shliach of Ruvain's to do malacha on Shabbos. No, because Ruvain's not getting any revenue on Shabbos. All of the bakery revenue is going to Tony. So Nachri Adaita didn't have shake of it. It's not an Amir La'akum problem, but it's a schar Shabbos problem. Because it's as if, let's isolate the case. Let's say, forget this whole partnership. Let's say Reuven owns a bakery oven. Tony comes to him and says, can I rent your oven on Shabbos? I'll pay you $500 for the day. On Shabbos, I'll run the oven and I'll make money. Says Reuven, yeah, go ahead. You know how to do that. That's schar Shabbos. You're making $500 off of your bakery oven on Shabbos. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, there are those that say that this Tanai wouldn't take care of the Shabbos problems in this scenario, because you would have a schar Shabbos problem. The Kevin Chaguf Atanu Hu Shel Yisrael, because since the Tanner is fully owned by the Yid, Havalei Kamaskeloi Tanurei al Shabbos, what's really happening here is Reuven's renting out his oven to Tony for Shabbos, Sheyasik Loi, so that Tony should be able to fire up the oven and use it on Shabbos, Bishvil Zeh, and now you have to change the girsa over here a little bit. Bishvil Zeh Schar Hatanur Yom Echad Shel Choil. What's the rental payment? The rental payment is that on Yom Echad Shel Choil, on Tuesday, Reuven gets to keep all the Schar Hatanur. He keeps 100% of the revenue on Tuesday instead of only getting 50% of the revenue on Tuesday. V'asa lital Schar Shabbos, and this would be also because of Schar Shabbos. Very interesting. I would be tempted to review it, but we don't have time. So you could always hit the rewind button and go over it again. Says Mishnah Berurah, take a look at the Magen Avram Shamasik, who concludes, it would be proper to be machmir, and in such a case you cannot use that tonight. But, says the Magen Avram, realize that the problem that we're dealing with over here is a schar Shabbos problem. And we know the way to avoid schar Shabbos is havla. What's havla? Don't make $500 for the day of Shabbos. Make $500 for Friday, Shabbos, and Sunday. So you're being mavliah the schar Shabbos together with the schar Friday and the schar Sunday. So says the Mishnah Berurah, that's the way around this problem too. But if you create a havla situation, what would that be? Kigoin, for example, that Reuven tells Tony the baker, you work the oven and take 100% of the revenue for Friday, Shabbos, and Sunday. And I'll take all the revenue Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Now it's okay. Because again, there's no Amir La'akum problem here. It's only a schar Shabbos problem. Shari kishish this would be mutter as long as you make it up all the way in the beginning. V'yesh be'achreidim shesovrin, and there are those that say deloi be'inon bazeh that in this case, which is she'ein la'ein Yehudi chelik b'gof hatanur, that the case that we have been discussing, where the Yid has 100% ownership of the oven, you don't need hisnu me'ikara. There are achreidim that say that in this case you don't have to make the Tanai up front. You know why you don't have to make the Tanai up front? Because there's no Amir La'akum here. Let's say Reuven and Tony buy the bakery oven. And after they buy the bakery oven, they go ahead and they make up a setup. You know what, Tony? I'm thinking about it. I have Shabbos issues. You know what? Let's make it simple. I own the oven. You're the baker. The upmach is 50-50. I get 50% of the revenue for ownership of the oven. You get 50% for working the oven and being the baker. The way I want to construct it is Friday, Shabbos, and Sunday, all the revenue is yours. Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, all the revenue is mine. Wednesday, Thursday, we'll divvy up the revenue. These achrayim say the truth is that you don't have to make that deal before you buy the oven. You can make the deal after you make the oven, because there's not going to be any Amir La'akum. What would the Amir La'akum be? You're going to say that Tony is acting as a shliach on Shabbos? No, he's not. He owns 50% of the business. This is not I'm acting as a shliach to cover your obligation on Shabbos. You don't have an obligation on Shabbos in this case. I'm the baker. You're not the baker. I'm the baker. And in turn for that, I get 50% of the revenue. Nachri adaited than I've shake of it, and there's no schar Shabbos problem because of Avlah. Kevin Shahu Ba'avlah. Okay, boy, we're getting short on time, and we still have quite a bit to cover over here, so let's go weiter. Another couple of interesting Mishnah Berurahs over here. Continues the Ramah first, 4 lines down, about 2/3 of the way through the line. Says the Ramah, V'yeshai, remember, there are those that say, Shekolzeh, this whole topic, where we're saying that you need to make a Tanai with the Nachri before you enter into the joint venture, Shekolzeh loy mairi ela b'shutvis, it's only the Geya when you have a partnership that is constructed Shekol echad oisik biyoimoi. The only time this is a problem is if you enter into a partnership whereby the understanding is that the workload is going to be broken up by fixed days. That's where you have this problem, and we'll explain it in a minute. But if the way the partnership is set up is that we own this business as a joint venture, so we understand we're both carrying sort of 100% of the load of the business. And we all work together. Come on, we're in this together. Me and you, Tony, we're in this together. We each cover 100% of the workload. Sometimes I work this day, sometimes you work that day, sometimes we both work together. Some days I have a dentist appointment and I'm not in the shop Tuesday morning. Sometimes I'm in the shop all day with you on Tuesday. One day you got to go to the mechanic or your kid has a softball game and you're not there. But it's not a rigid arrangement. In a rigid arrangement, it's understood that I have to cover 50% of the time, you're going to cover 50% of the time. In a non-rigid arrangement, it's much more loosey-goosey. Says the Ramah, there are those that say that this whole necessity of this Tanai is only in the rigid arrangement. Shekol echad oisik biyoimoi. Aval kishishneim oisik biyachad kol yemei achol or b'Shabbos asa ge'eni Yehudi levadoi. In the loosey-goosey arrangement, if it becomes that Tony, the Eini Yehudi, always covers Shabbos alone, mutalach lekimai kol aschar. The Yid is allowed to divide up all the revenue, even, so to speak, the Shabbos revenue. Why? The Eini Yehudi adaited and Avshei covered, because really the Eini Yehudi is working on Shabbos adaited and Avshei for his own purposes, to make his money, because he's getting 50% of the revenue of the business. The Eina Yisrael nene b'malachtoi b'Shabbos. And the Yid is not being nene from the fact that Tony is doing the work on Shabbos. Now, he's being nene because he's going to get 50% of the revenue. What the Ramah means, he's not being nene from the fact that Tony is covering the workload. It's not pshat that Tony is in the bakery on Shabbos in order to cover me. If we always work together, so you're not covering me, I'm not covering you. We have a business together, we're in this together, and sometimes I'm there, sometimes you're there, but it's not pshat that when I'm there alone, I'm covering you. And when you're there alone, you're covering me. No, when I'm there alone, I'm working in my business. Why am I here? Somebody will come in and ask Tony, why are you here today? Oh, I'm covering for Ruvain. No. What do you mean, why am I here? It's my bakery. Don't you see the sign outside? Ruvain and Tony's Fine Baked Goods? So what do you mean, why am I here? Of course I'm here. If it's a rigid arrangement and it's understood I'm going to work X days, you're going to work X days, so the reason I'm here is because it's my day. What does my day mean? My day means I'm covering. Now, you own 50% of this business, so if I'm covering today, I'm covering for you. That's when you need the Tanai, says the Ramah. But in a loosey-goosey arrangement, you don't need it. Kevin she'ena malachim would tell us Allah v'lasais. But, says the Ramah, even in this kind of arrangement, lo yitol schar Shabbos ela b'havla im shar yamin. But still, when you divide up the revenue, you would have a schar Shabbos issue. So you have to make sure that when you divide up the revenue, You're doing it b'havla. You're not just taking Shabbos revenue. You're dividing up all the revenue from the whole week. Now let's see this. Let's do a deeper dive into the Svaris over here in the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut and test. The Ramah said there are those that say that the whole necessity of making the Gemara and Avodah Zarah's Tanai up front before you buy the oven. Tony realized Shabbos is on you, Tuesday is on me. I'm divesting myself of Shabbos. Says the Ramah, there are those that say that that's only Negeah when you have a very rigid arrangement where everybody works biyomoy. Everybody works on designated days. Says the Chavetz Chaim, why? To us, because it's such a case. Kevan da Yisrael oisa kol yom rishon. If the arrangement is, okay, we're each going to work set days, so then why is the Yid working Sunday? Why is the Yid working the whole day Sunday? I'm working Sunday, so you could go to the softball game on Sunday. We need to divide up the days. You don't want Sundays because your kid has a softball game on Sunday. I don't want Shabbos because I ain't going to work on Saturday. So why am I working Sunday? I'm working Sunday so you can work Shabbos. Why are you working Shabbos? So I can work Sunday. That's usher. That's when we need the Tanai up front, so there should not be any Miralakim situation. The Kasva Achreinim, the Achreinim right, to Huadin ima Eina Yehudi, another case. The Huadin ima Eina Yehudi nasan mois liYisrael lehesasik ben b'chol. Let's say you have a Yiddish investment manager, an investment banker, and the Eina Yehudi comes to the investment banker and he says, I'm giving you $250,000 to invest and manage. Now, we're talking about a case where the money, for some reason, has to be managed on a daily basis. So the Yid goes ahead and he accepts the money to manage, but he can't manage it on Shabbos. So the Goy is going to manage it on Shabbos. Ub'Shabbos Masasiku, says the Achronim, the Osel Yisrael Kalbi Menu Schar Min HaRevach Shenoil B'Shabbos. If they're dividing up the dividends that are earned by this money, the Yid cannot take any profits, any revenues that were generated on Shabbos. Unless the Upmach was up front, I could work with your money, but only 6 days a week. I can't work on Shabbos. Because otherwise you would have an Amir Lakum problem that the guy is working for you on Shabbos. The Ramah said, so when do we need this tonight? If it's a rigid day for day arrangement. But if it's a loosey-goosey arrangement, that what do you mean, we're in this together, then you don't need the Tanai. Why? Because then it's not Adaited and Avshei Kovid. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yud. Adaited and Avshei Kovid, Bishvil Chelkoi. If it's a loosey-goosey arrangement, so then whenever the Eina Yehudi is in the shop, he's in the shop because he's running his own business. Now, it's true, if he's in the shop alone on Shabbos, and he's firing up the oven, and he's baking bread and selling bread, he's generating revenue for Reuven. But we saw that already in Reish Mem Gimel. If you have an orus, a sharecropper, that's going ahead and working the field, even though he's working the field and you're going to get 50% of the revenue from the field, we don't see over there an Amir Lakum problem. Why? Because he's not working for you. He's working for his own 50%. So to over here, Reuven and Tony's fine baked goods. When Tony goes in there on Shabbos, he's not going in there to make money for Reuven. He's going in there because it's his business. Because the Aris, why is it mutter? Because he's getting his portion of the produce. So the fact that the Yid is making money is only peripheral. It's memela. The same thing here. In Reish Mem Gimel, we said that the oris by the bakery oven would be aser because maris ayin, because it wasn't the derech to give out an oris to give out an oven in an oris type arrangement. People are going to think he's an employee. The kan like a maris ayin, but over here, Reuven and Tony's fine baked goods, there's no maris ayin. Everybody knows it's Reuven and Tony's business, so there's no maris ayin. I've got Yud Aleph. The Ramah's words were, in that case, it's mutter because ve'ein ha-Yisrael nene. The Yisrael is not having anah. The Yisrael is having anah because he's going to take 50% of the revenue. But what the Ramah means that the Yid is not having anah is, I'm not having enough from the fact that you're working on Shabbos. You're not working on Shabbos to be mahana me. If it's a rigid arrangement, you're working on Shabbos to be mahana me so that I don't have to work on Shabbos. You're covering me. But if it's loosey-goosey, we're in this together, you're not covering me. You're in it for yourself. V'eni Yisrael nene. It's saying alarma. What the Rama means to say is, the hanasei hu rak hana de memela. The hana is only the hana of the prophet, which is a hana memela. But Tony's not working to cover Ruvain and being mahani him with his coverage. He's on his shliach. Because the Yid doesn't have an obligation to come in on Shabbos. There are no fixed obligations. You this day, me that day. Maybe I never come in. Maybe I do all the business end. Maybe you're the guy who picks out the flour and I'm the guy who covers the books. Sometimes they work together. Tony wouldn't be able to force Ruvain to come in on Shabbos. The Rama just pointed out that when you do divide up the money, you have to make sure that there's no schar Shabbos problem. Which means that when you're dividing up the revenue, you can't be isolating Shabbos' revenue and taking a piece of Shabbos' revenue. That would be schar Shabbos. It has to be that you're dividing up the revenue of all week, so that there's havla. Bavla, the ilavachi, merci, kischar, Shabbos. Okay. Moving along to Sif Beis, 2 lines from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, end of the line. Says the Mechaber, Heicha shehisnu betchila. Let's say they did the right thing. They made the proper Tanai up front before they ever moved into the business venture. Im achakach b'shas chaluka. If then, at the end of the fiscal year, and by the way, when I say end of the fiscal year, I'm just doing that to try to put a practical sense to it. I don't mean that there's any significance to that. Whenever they set about to make the chalukah, if later on, b'shas chalukah, when it's time to sit down with the accountant to divvy up the revenues, nisratza ha'eni Yehudi lachlik b'shaveh, the Eni Yehudi willingly decides to go ahead and divvy up everything 50-50, mutter, that's mutter. Well, let's understand what the Mechaber is saying over here. Again, let's say we're talking about the bakery oven. So Ruvain spoke to his Rav before he went into this business venture with Tony, and he knew what he had to do. So before they signed the deal to buy the oven, Ruvain sat down with Tony and said, you're going to do 100% of the Shabbos work, you're going to keep 100% of the Shabbos revenue. I'm going to do 100% of the Tuesday work, I'm going to keep 100% of the Tuesday revenue. And we're talking about the case where they actually own the oven as a joint venture. So this is a case that certainly needs the Tanai. So they did what they were supposed to do. He made the Tanai up front. Then when they sit down with the accountant, B'shas Chalukah, Tony turns around and says, we're 50-50 partners. Let's just divide it 50-50. Says the Mechaber, mutter, that would be mutter. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yud Gimel 3 lines off the bottom. Nesratza ha'ena Yehudi. Ritzayna loymar. What the Mechaber means to say is, Sha'ala lefi ma shehisnu hein rav oy ma'at al chelik HaShabbos yoyser miyom echad ha'chol shel Yisrael. The revenue fell out however the revenue fell out. Maybe Shabbos was making more money than Tuesday. Maybe Shabbos was making less money than Tuesday. Ubeshas chalukah nisratz alachlik b'shaveh. But when they sit down to make the chalukah, Tony turns to Ruvain and says, let's not get all complicated about this. Let's just divide it 50-50. Now, how do we analyze this? On the one hand, Ruvain did exactly what he was supposed to do. He completely divested himself from the Shabbos business. He told Tony up front, before they ever bought the oven, Shabbos is going to be all yours. You do all the work, you keep all the revenue. Tuesday is going to be all mine. I'm going to do all the work, I'm going to keep the revenue. So, when they sit down to make the chalukah, what they're supposed to do is isolate Shabbos and Tuesday. Tony is supposed to take all of Shabbos' revenue, and the Yid's supposed to take all of Tuesday's revenue, and it'll fall out however it falls out. If a lot of people come buy bread on Shabbos, so then okay, maybe Tony will make out like a bandit. Or if on the other hand, on Shabbos people are home and they like to bake, so maybe he won't make out like a bandit, and maybe Ruvain will have ended up selling a lot more bread on Tuesday. But however it falls out, it falls out. That's walking to the accountant's office. That's the way it should have been. Now, Tony turned around and said, bad, let's just split it 50-50. So you might be tempted to say, well, wait a second. If now they're splitting it 50-50, doesn't that mean Igloi Milsalam Afreya, that when Tony was working on Shabbos, he really was being Tony's shliach? Says Mishnah Berurah, no. So then why is he doing it? You know what's happening? Tony's tuning to Reuven and saying, come on, we know each other for 20 years. What are we getting all complicated about? We're good buddies. Just split it 50-50. Because they made the deal. They're not reneging on the deal. And this is not like the case that we had earlier, where let's say Shabbos was never spoken about. Or they didn't speak about Shabbos until they made the Chalukah. Or maybe even it's the case, well, let's see the Mishnah Berurah now. The deal was struck, and everybody was ready to keep to the deal. Reuven was perfectly ready to keep to the deal. Tony turned around and said, nah, let's split it 50-50. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, this is only true if Tony agreed to divide things equally. He did it kind of as they're walking into the accountant's office. He says, you know what, let's just split it 50-50. It was not done in reaction to seeing what the results of the Chalukah would be. So it's not that they sat down and they made the cheshbon based on Shabbos being Tony's and Tuesdays being Reuven's, and then Tony turned around and said, let's just split it equally. That would be a problem. If Tony made this magnanimous offer only as a reaction to the cheshbon, maybe the Yid told Tony at the time of the division, you know, you got for Shabbos $100, and I only got 50 for Tuesday. Okay, but what are you going to do? Listen, that's the deal that we made. And maybe Reuven said to Tony, you know, it's really not fair. I mean, you know, all the time that we spoke about this joint venture, it was always going to be 50-50. And then just before we signed the paper, I realized I had a Shabbos problem. So we made this deal Shabbos and Tuesday. But look, you made out like a bandit. Now I'm $50 short. Maybe make it up to me. And now Tony says, all right, just keep 50-50. That, if you go back already to Zayin Amud Aleph, Mishnah Berurah is cutting hay. Over there, the Mishnah Berurah addressed this case. And the Mishnah Berurah said that the Magen Avram paskins like the Ravid who would be machmir. Because now, what does it mean? Now it means that the whole thing was wink-wink. If that's what's going to happen, if, Reuven listened to the Rav and he made the whole deal before they signed to buy the oven, but now, 12 months later, when they sit down to divide up the revenue, he realizes he's on the short end of the stick. He complains to Tony, and Tony says, nah, come on, just take it. So that means that the whole thing was wink-wink. If it's wink-wink, we're not happy about that. At least the Magen Avram is machmer. There's a yesh makilin, okay. But that's, all right, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. This list of Liman HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should said, Yeshua Sefurus Parnassah Shetuchim to all those in need. And we should be zeichet to see the Bias Goyel Tzedek B'mehera V'yameinu. Amen. Be well.